Sam Adams, a senior editor at Slate Magazine, joins us now from Philadelphia. Thanks so much for being with us, Sam. Start by telling me where you stand on Disney's decision here. Necessary, overly cautious, perhaps not enough?
I think it's a good first step. This is part of a larger initiative, as your piece mentioned, called Stories Matter that Disney had, where they've added this disclaimer to movies like Dumbo and Aladdin and The Swiss Family Robinson. So this is very much in a piece like that. They have outside experts come in and evaluate the content in their library. And for me, I think it's an appropriate step. I mean, this is not some people have, phrased this as being part of cancel culture or something. It's important to underline that nothing is being canceled here. There are some segments that have been removed from the Muppet Show and Disney Plus, but as far as anyone can tell, those are all having to do with the legal rights to the music and stuff like that. These just have a disclaimer that says, especially if you're watching with children, as I've done in my home, it just says, maybe watch this episode with your kid. You may want to be ready to pause it at some point and explain to them what's going on. The disclaimer is very sort of vague and general because this is kind of one size fits all solution. So it fits some circumstances better than other. And there's no explanation as to why a particular episode has been flagged, which is a little confusing. So you're sort of playing a guessing game as you're watching and be like, is this the thing? Is this where the part is going to, you don't exactly know when to be on your guard, and that's a little disorienting.
And I think, it's fair because some of the critics take into account the fact that a lot of these films are children's films. They're made for a very young audience. If you look at a film like Dumbo, adults may be able to see some racist undertones in some of the characters there, but kids just see animals singing. They would never in a million years think anything racist, of a crow as a character in a film like Dumbo. But at the same time, there's a very progressive message in there saying how kind of evil and sinister zoos and circuses can be. So ironically, they were almost ahead of their time, Disney was, pointing out certain levels of cruelty against animals and things that people thought nothing of at the time.
Yeah, Dumbo is an interesting case because you're basically talking about the movie employing these kind of minstrel stereotypes of Jim Crow, which kids today are so far removed from they wouldn't even understand. I think that these crows are meant to represent racist caricatures of African Americans because it's so many steps removed. But if you do know that, it's pretty noxious stuff. And I think it's, again, something you might just want to hit the pause button on, or if you don't feel like instructing your 6-year-old in the history of minstrelsy in the U.S., maybe you just watch a different movie.
Right. Which scenes, though, tell me, in which movies or shows really do kind of shock you the most?
Well, since we're talking about the Muppet Show, there is some of the episodes are, like showing a Confederate flag in the Johnny Cash segment. That seems like less of a big deal to me, but there's an episode featuring the British comedian Spike Milligan, where they do a sort of version of It's a Small World, and he is coming in, costumed as all these people from different countries. And he comes in at one point with, sort of like buck teeth and a ponytail to represent a Chinese person. And that's pretty awful, and that's something that if I were watching that episode with the child, I would want to stop and say, that's not okay. Here's what's going on there. And that I find, on the one hand, as someone who regularly consumes content from 40 years ago, not shocking in this. I've seen Breakfast at Tiffany's, so I know there's worse stuff out there from the same period there, but it's pretty bad.
Yeah, it's amazing. You bring up, movies like Breakfast at Tiffany's that were considered these, all-time classics and stuff, celebrated films. I go back, and you might have done the same, and watch, our favorite films from the 80s. And I almost get sick at looking at the homophobia in those films and how it was just open game. Homosexuals were there almost just to be made a caricature of. And yet those were considered classic 80s teen movies in a lot of respect. Do you think it's just a matter of time before those start to be addressed as well?
I think in some cases they're things that should be addressed. We recently watched the first Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, which is just a wonderful kind of warm-hearted movie. It has this really great message, just, be excellent to each other, which, as true then as it was now. But there's a scene where these two male characters, high school students from California, kind of surfer dudes, embrace. And then they kind of step back and look at each other, and then they use punch each other in the arm and use this homophobic slur. And that's what those characters would have done. I was a teenager in 1986. I'm sure I would have said something like that to one of my friends at the time. But it is, certainly from today's point of view, I mean, that is
We
shocking.
cringe
And
today.
it is, yeah, yeah, it's bad.
We
So
really
it's, I mean, anything that's 40 years old is going to look,
sure.
is going to be a victim of, changing times in some respect. And I think really the overall message here is you just can't park a child, especially in front of something that's,
Right.
two or three times their age ago and expect nothing's going to come up that you might need to answer questions about.
Do you feel maybe we're kind of in the midst of maybe an indefinite process here to address, some of the wrongs of the past and help those who've never really fallen victim to discrimination understand what it feels like to be on the other side? And we can use these old movies and shows as a good example.
Right. I think that's a very important point because a lot of what's changing here is not just, oh, that society's changed and things that were okay then aren't okay now. But a lot of it is just, who has the opportunity to say that? You look at a movie like going, back over 100 years to The Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffith's movie, which is notoriously racist,
Yeah.
and is widely understood to be that way now. And at the time, the president of the United States lauded it and said it was history written with lightning. But also the NAACP was protesting that movie in 1915. So people knew then, and it's just there are more people in the conversation now. And I think that's the way it should be.
Right. Sam, thanks so much for joining us there from Philly. We really appreciate it. Great to have you.